Welcome, night owls, to 2-Hour Horror Stories. I'm your host for the next 2 chilling hours. These aren't just bedtime stories, they're terrifying. Subscribe if you dare, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Now, silence your phone, close your eyes, and let the horror in. They pulled into the rest stop just past midnight. A warn sign creaked in the wind. Pine Hollow Rest Area. Next services 62 miles. The lot was nearly empty except for a single, pale green sedan parked under the flickering street lamp. They chose a spot far from the car. Just a quick bathroom break. That's all it was supposed to be. Inside the restroom, the air was cold and still. Too still. There were no echoes, no distant highway sounds, no chirps from outside. Just an unnatural silence that seemed to press in on the ears. As Mark approached the sinks, he caught sight of someone in the mirror. A man, middle-aged, wearing a beige windbreaker, standing perfectly still at the last stall. Not using it, just facing it. Motionless, as though he were listening to something on the other side. Mark turned, confused. No one was there. He glanced back at the mirror. The man was still there, same posture, same place, but the reflection was wrong. The stall was open now, yet the man still stood in front of it in the mirror. Mark blinked. The reflection was gone. Back in the car, Mark didn't mention it. Just tired eyes, tricks of fluorescent lights. They drove off. 10 miles down the road, Sarah said something strange. "Did you see that guy?" At the rest stop, Mark hesitated. What guy? She described him exactly. Beige jacket, thinning hair, standing by the stall. But she'd never gone inside. She'd waited by the vending machines outside the entire time. Then how'd you know what he looked like? He asked. She looked at him, expression unreadable. I didn't. I dreamed it. Just now. While you were driving. They drove the next 20 miles in silence. Later, when they stopped for gas, Mark went inside the station to ask for directions. As he waited behind an older man paying for smokes, he saw it again. Through the station's glass window, that same pale green sedan, parked under a lamp, beige windbreaker standing next to it, staring, not moving. Mark stepped outside quickly. The parking space was empty. When he got back to the car, Sarah was pale. He was just standing at the pump, she said, looking at me, didn't say anything. The rest of the drive passed under a cloud of growing unease. They tried brushing it off. Maybe they were just paranoid. Maybe it was some traveler they'd both seen and subconsciously fixated on. It had been a long day. Brains do strange things when they're tired. They checked into a roadside motel just before dawn. Room 108. Faint smell of mildew, stale air, floral curtains that hadn't moved in years. Mark went to wash up. He froze when he turned on the bathroom light. In the corner, where the light didn't fully reach, there was a smudge on the mirror. No, not a smudge. A handprint. Faint. Long fingers, as though pressed from the other side of the glass. He called out to Sarah. She came in, eyes widening. I saw that, at the rest stop mirror. Mark reached to wipe it away. His fingertips met cold glass and nothing more. But when he looked closely, there were other prints. Smaller, fainter, almost like they'd been inside the mirror trying to get out. That night, neither of them slept. At 3:17 a.m., the front desk called. Said someone had left their car lights on in the lot. Pale green sedan. Room 108 was the only room that matched the booking name. But they didn't drive a sedan. They peeked out the curtains. There it was, sitting under a buzzing light. Empty, except it wasn't. Inside, in the driver's seat, was the man in the beige windbreaker, facing forward. Hands on the wheel, perfectly still. They checked out before sunrise. The next day, Mark called the highway patrol, asked if there had been any reports about strange vehicles near Pine Hollow Rest area. The dispatcher went silent for a moment, then asked him to hold. When she came back, her tone was different. "There used to be a man," she said, 20 years ago, traveled up and down that stretch of highway, always alone, always parked at the rest stop overnight. Locals said he was looking for something or someone. What happened to him? His car was found abandoned, parked under a flickering light, keys in the ignition, driver's seat empty. But the mirror in the bathroom, it had a message. Mark asked what it said. The dispatcher didn't answer right away. Then she spoke, barely above a whisper. "He never left." Mark hung up without another word. A week later, he received a letter in the mail. No return address. No posti. Just a folded piece of paper inside. It said, "See you again soon. You left your reflection behind." He ran to the bathroom mirror, heart pounding. There were 2 handprints this time, and they weren't his. When Kyle checked into the small, roadside motel on the outskirts of Utah, he hadn't planned to stay longer than one night. It was the kind of place that didn't exist on most apps. Barely a sliver of a name on Google Maps, with faded signage and a vacancy light that buzzed softly against the dark desert silence. The clerk behind the desk never asked for ID. He just handed over the key. An actual key, not a card, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and said, "Room 6, quiet night ahead." Kyle took it as a blessing. He'd been driving for 10 hours. Sleep was the only thing on his mind. The room was fine. Dated furniture, dim yellow lighting, a bed that creaked like old bones. The kind of place that wore its history like a bruise. But it was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet where your own breathing starts to sound like a problem. At around 1:17 a.m., Kyle woke up with the distinct feeling of being watched. He hadn't heard anything. Not at first. Just that prickle at the back of the neck, the one you can't justify with logic. He stared at the ceiling for a while, convinced it was just the unfamiliar setting messing with his head. Then the voice came. It was faint, muffled, like someone whispering through a mouthful of earth. First, it didn't form words, just a hushed rhythm, like chanting or humming. Kyle sat up slowly, ears straining. He pressed one against the wall behind the bed. Nothing, but the whispering came again. Not behind the bed this time, inside the opposite wall. He got up and walked over. It stopped when he approached. "Hello." Nothing. He laughed, nervously, told himself the pipes were probably old. Maybe someone in the next room was watching a movie too loud. But when he stepped out into the hallway to check, the doors on either side of room 6 were unnumbered, just blank slabs of wood, and they didn't have doorknobs. When he asked the clerk about it the next morning, the man paused for just a second too long. "There are no guests in the adjoining rooms," he said. "Just you last night." Kyle didn't like the way he said it, like it was a warning, not a reassurance. That night, he made a point to record the sounds. He set up his phone on the nightstand and hit record before he went to bed. The whispering started again around 2 a.m. This time it said his name, over and over, soft, almost melodic. "Kyle, Kyle, Kyle." But there was something off about the way it was said, like whoever or whatever was saying it didn't understand how human mouths worked. He jumped out of bed and slammed his fist against the wall. The whispering stopped instantly. When he played back the audio the next morning, he heard something else layered beneath the whispering. Faint but there. A second voice, slower and heavier. It said, "He hears us now." Kyle left, packed up in silence, and drove 6 hours out of his way just to avoid the area. But the voice followed him. Not right away. not on the drive. But the next time he stayed in a motel 2 states over, he heard scratching in the walls again. And the whisper came back. This time it was louder, closer, no longer confined to the walls. He checked out before sunrise, slept in his car for weeks. It didn't help. Everywhere he went, every town, every hotel. Eventually the voices found him. They grew more confident. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they repeated his thoughts back to him, out loud, before he even knew he was thinking them. At first, he thought he was going insane, but he never told anyone. There was a part of him that feared acknowledging it would make it worse. One night, 3 months later, he returned home. No more road, no more running. He boarded up his apartment walls, lined them with soundproofing foam. He never answered his phone again, never opened the door. But it didn't matter. The voices were inside now, not in the walls, not in the vents. Inside him, they speak through his mouth when he sleeps. Sometimes his neighbors hear it through the vents. They say he sings to someone at 3 a.m. And sometimes he responds to questions no one's asked. The last person who visited him swears they heard multiple voices in the apartment, even though he lived alone. And on one of his voice recordings, played back during a wellness check, the police heard something strange. Right before the tape cut out, a whisper said, "Room 6 never checks out." It was late, just past 2 a.m., when Matt left his friend's house on the edge of town. The roads were empty, save for the occasional flicker of distant headlights. His car hummed steadily as he pulled up to the only traffic light at the intersection of Holloway and 9th. Turned red. He stopped. Another car coasted up beside him in the next lane. A dusty, silver sedan with its windows tinted almost entirely black. The kind of tint that wasn't just dark, it was impenetrable. Matt glanced over instinctively. The engine idled softly. No movement, no sound, no phone glow, nothing inside. The light turned green. Matt accelerated, but the silver sedan didn't move. It sat there, still, confused. Matt tapped his brakes, glanced in the rearview. The car remained unmoving at the green light. No door opened.
No flashes.
Just stillness. He turned around the block, thinking maybe the driver had passed out or something worse. But when he looped back to the intersection, less than a minute later, the car was gone. Not gone as in drove off. Gone as in vanished. There were no tire marks, no lingering exhaust, and definitely no sign of it turning in either direction. Matt's skin tightened with a chill. He told himself it must have pulled away while he was looping around. He tried to believe it, but part of him knew he would have seen it. The next day, Matt looked up local forums and traffic cams, curious to see if anyone else saw the silver sedan. No one had posted about it.
No incidents.
No photos. But then, buried deep in an old forum thread titled, "Strange Things on Holloway After Midnight," Matt found a comment from 7 years ago. Anyone else seen that silver car at the red light? Every few years, someone sees it. Driver doesn't move. Then it's just gone. Don't stop if you see it. Just go. The comment was timestamped at 2:11 a.m. Same intersection. Same time. Matt's curiosity spiraled into obsession. He began driving that route every few nights, stopping at the light, hoping to see the car again. Weeks passed. Nothing. Then one night he didn't need to look for it. Found him. The air had that strange pressure before a storm. As he approached the intersection, his headlights caught it again. The silver sedan. Right lane. Motionless. Windows dark. This time, Matt didn't glance. He stared. And this time, the car's engine wasn't on.
No headlights.
No sound. Just parked. Something pulled at him. a mix of dread and fascination. He couldn't stop himself from lowering his window. The moment the glass dropped, he heard it. A low hum, a frequency so subtle it made the bones behind his ears ache. Then movement, from inside the sedan. Not a person, a shape, slouched, barely visible, like someone made of shadow just leaned forward. The driver tilted its head, slowly, toward Matt, and the moment its head turned, every streetlight at the intersection blinked out. Darkness swallowed the block. Matt slammed his foot on the gas and tore through the red light, the roar of his own engine drowning out the hum. As he looked in the rearview mirror, the sedan was gone. Again, he didn't sleep that night, or the next. His ears rang for days. Eventually, he stopped taking that route. But the fear didn't stop following him. Then, one afternoon, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Just an image. It was a traffic cam still frame from the intersection of Holloway and 9th. Timestamp, 2:07 a.m. There were two cars stopped at the light, Matt's and the silver sedan. But what caught his eye, what made his chest seize, was the reflection in his own window. A face, thin, pale, not his, sitting beside him, and it was smiling. He chose the cabin for its isolation, a break from the digital noise, from people, from everything. No service, no Wi-Fi, just trees, wind, and time to think. He brought books, a journal, and a lighter for the wood-burning stove. The first night passed quietly, a little creaking from the rafters, the usual sounds of settling wood. By morning, frost had spread like veins across the window glass. He brewed instant coffee, stepped outside, and noticed something strange. A perfectly circular indentation on the snow-covered porch. No footprints, just the mark like something heavy had pressed down, then vanished. He told himself it was an animal, maybe a raccoon, but raccoons leave tracks. This had no trail, no entry or exit. That night, while reading, he heard a knock. 3 dull thuds against the cabin door. Not urgent, not angry, just deliberate. He didn't move. Another 3 knocks. He crept toward the window beside the door. No porch light, no street lamp. Only the reflection of the fire behind him and his own silhouette in the glass. He stood there, waiting for another sound. None came. Eventually, he opened the door. Nothing. Just dark trees and a cold wind that curled around the frame like a whisper. He stepped outside. The snow was untouched.
No footprints.
No sign anyone had come near. He barely slept. The knocks didn't return that night, but something felt wrong. The air in the cabin seemed heavier, the shadows longer. On the 3rd night, the knocks came again, but this time not just on the door. First 3 knocks, then a pause, then 3 more, this time from the back wall of the cabin, then the side, then directly above him. He ran outside with a flashlight, circled the cabin in bare feet, scanning every surface. The snow remained pristine. Not even his own footprints showed. That detail hit him too late. He was standing in snow, but leaving no tracks. The flashlight flickered. He dropped it. By the time he got back inside, he swore he could hear breathing just beyond the door, slow, steady, matching his own heartbeat. He bolted it shut, shoved a chair under the handle, and kept the fire roaring all night. The next day he packed. Books, journal, stove left behind. He couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't been alone. Not just during the knocks, but the entire time. When he turned the key in the car ignition, the radio flared to life. Static, then a voice. 3 words. "Let me in." He turned it off. The road out was longer than he remembered. Trees seemed to crowd the edges. At one point, the tires thudded as if he'd run over something. But when he checked, there was nothing there. 2 hours from town, he realized something else. He was still cold. Despite the heater on full blast, the chill hadn't left his skin. It clung to him like wet clothes. That night, in his apartment, he heard it again. 3 knocks. Not at the front door. At the window. 3rd floor. He pulled the curtain. Nothing there. But the glass was fogged, like someone had exhaled against it. And in the center, a perfect circle, exactly like the one on the cabin porch. He didn't sleep. The knocks became a pattern. Always 3. Always at different locations. Never at the same time. His apartment, the car, a hotel once when he tried to outrun it. And then one day a package arrived. No return address. Inside, a small wooden square, part of a door. His cabin door. On the back, scratched deep into the wood, were the same 3 words from the radio. Let me in. He burned it, threw the ashes in a river. But the knocks kept coming. One night, just before dawn, he snapped. Threw open the door, shouted into the street. I know you're there. What do you want? A pause. Then 3 knocks. From inside his apartment. He turned slowly. The sound had come from the closet door. The same dull, deliberate rhythm. He stepped toward it, hand shaking. Put his ear against the wood. Silence. Then 3 more knocks. But this time, something knocked back in the exact rhythm he'd just used. Mimicking him, he backed away. The doorknob turned. Just slightly. He moved out the next day. Different city, new name, no records. It didn't matter. No matter how far he ran, no matter how quiet he stayed, it always found him. And every time he thought it was gone, he'd hear it again. 3 knocks. Somewhere behind the walls, or the mirror, or the bed. He stopped answering, stopped reacting, until last week. There were 3 knocks on the ceiling. Then, for the first time, he knocked back, and whatever it was, knocked back too. It was nearly midnight when I spotted him. Just a figure at the edge of the road, hunched slightly forward, thumb outstretched. The kind of person you're trained to ignore. But something about the way he stood, like he was waiting for me, not just a ride. The road was long and barren, flanked by forest on both sides. I hadn't seen another car for at least 40 minutes. I slowed down. He stepped into the beam of my headlights.
No bags.
Just a dark hoodie, face mostly shadowed. I cracked the window, partly regretting the impulse already. Where you headed? I asked. He looked straight at me and said, Same place you are, Dylan. I hadn't told him my name. My first instinct was that he'd seen my license plate somehow, or maybe I'd left something identifying visible inside the car. But my name wasn't on anything. I kept my work ID in my glove box, zipped away. There was no way he could have known. Still, I told myself I was being paranoid. I unlocked the door. He got in without saying another word. No thank you. Just sat there silent, facing forward like he'd done this ride 1,000 times. I forced a cough and asked, So, you from around here? He didn't respond. I checked the rearview mirror and found him staring straight at me. Not through me, at me. His lips barely parting like he was trying to smile but didn't know how. You shouldn't have ignored the sign back there, he finally said. What sign? But he didn't answer. I hadn't seen any sign. I focused back on the road. But something was different now. The forest felt closer, thicker, like the trees were leaning in. My headlights didn't reach as far as they should have. The air inside the car felt dense. He turned toward the window. This road doesn't lead where you think it does. I tightened my grip on the wheel.
Okay, man.
Is this a prank or something? He didn't laugh, didn't blink. I told myself I'd just pull over, drop him off and drive away. But every time I looked for a safe shoulder, the road stretched endlessly.
No breaks. No exits.
Just winding blacktop and trees. Then my phone buzzed in the console. Unknown number. The message read, "Do not let him know you're afraid." I glanced at him. He hadn't moved, but something in his posture had changed. He looked heavier somehow, like his body was anchoring down into the seat, warping it. Another buzz. "He remembers you, even if you don't." I dropped the phone. He spoke again. "You used to pass by this road when you were a kid. Remember the ditch? The one with the old tires and bones?" My mouth dried instantly. There had been a road like this. On family trips. My parents would never stop here. My mother called it a bad stretch. Said it always gave her chills. "How do you know that?" I asked, voice cracking. He didn't reply, just looked at me. But this time, his face was visible in the dim light. I don't know how to describe it. His features were misremembered, like a version of someone you once knew, drawn from memory after decades. Familiar but warped by time. His eyes were the worst part, too far apart, unblinking. "You left me there, Dylan," he said softly. "You were supposed to come back." My chest tightened. I swerved slightly, breath catching. "I don't know you." He leaned in. "But I know you. Every mistake, every turn you took to forget." I could feel the weight of his presence now. Not just physically in the car, but inside me. Memories I couldn't place. Feelings I didn't understand. Fear, yes, but something else. Guilt. "Why me?" I asked. He smiled barely. "Because you opened the door." The car began to shake. I thought it was the engine at first, but it wasn't. The world outside was rippling, the trees bending backward as if in slow motion. And the road, God, the road was unfolding, like peeling wallpaper. He reached into his pocket. I flinched, but he only pulled out something small. An old photograph, faded, almost burned at the edges. He handed it to me. There were 2 boys in it. One was me. The other was him. I stared in disbelief. "I don't remember this." "You blocked it out. But forgetting doesn't make it untrue." He tapped the photo. "You promised you wouldn't leave me there. You promised." Suddenly the road snapped back to normal. Headlights stretched again. The trees were still. The hum of the engine returned. But he was gone. The passenger seat was empty. No sound.
No scent.
Nothing. Except the photograph still resting in my lap. I drove straight through the night. Never stopped. Didn't even blink until I pulled into my driveway. I rushed inside, locked every door, closed every curtain. And that's when I saw it. A message on my bathroom mirror. Foggy but unmistakable. "You made it home this time, but next time, I'll be the one driving." He remembered checking in. That much he was sure of. Late night, long drive, the kind of weariness that makes your eyelids feel like they're stitched shut. The highway had been a blur, and the glowing vacancy sign was the only thing in miles. An old, 3-story building. Peeling paint. A buzzing neon sign that read the Silver Pines Inn. At the front desk, a man in a faded red vest handed him a rusted key. An actual key, not a card, and pointed to room 209. No ID check. No paperwork. Just a nod. The hallway was long. Too long. The kind that echoes with your own footsteps. The wallpaper curled at the corners, and the lights above flickered. Not in sync, but like they were struggling independently. He unlocked 209 and stepped inside. Sparse room, faded carpet, a single bed, and a musty scent that clung to the air like wet dust. But it was warm, and it was quiet. He collapsed onto the bed, still fully dressed, and let the silence swallow him. That should have been it. A night's sleep, but what woke him up wasn't a sound. It was a feeling. The air felt thicker and colder. He sat up and realized immediately something was wrong. The digital alarm clock on the nightstand blinked midnight. Static. No time. No light filtering through the curtains. Just a dense blackness outside the window, like someone had painted over the world. He stood, walked to the door, and tried the knob. Locked. He turned it harder. Nothing. He flicked the light switch. Darkness. He used his phone. No signal. Not even a carrier name. Just searching. Then came the knock. Not on his door. On the wall. From inside the room. 3 soft, deliberate knocks. Not a plumbing sound. Not a creak. A knock. He turned slowly. Pressed his ear to the wall. Nothing. Then again, knock. 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 Behind the headboard. Inside the wall. He stepped back, chest tightening. Something was behind there. Or someone. He backed toward the door, tried the knob again. Still locked. Panic set in. He slammed his fist against the door, yelling, but the sound didn't travel. It was like the air swallowed it. His own voice seemed quieter, muffled, as though he weren't yelling but whispering from far away. He noticed then the room was changing, very subtly. The paint on the walls, darker than before. The air had a sour smell. The mirror above the desk was no longer reflecting him. Just the room, as if he wasn't there. That's when he looked at the key on the nightstand. It didn't say 209 anymore. It said 209A. He had never seen an A on the key before. Trying again, he checked the window, pulled open the curtain. Nothing. Not darkness. Absence. There was no world beyond it. Just a black void, stretching out in every direction. Then came the voice. Faint. Female. Behind the wall. He checked in. Then a pause. But he never checked out. He backed away, trembling, and the door behind him clicked. Unlocked. Slowly, cautiously, he turned the knob and opened it. But the hallway wasn't the same. Curved now impossibly, like an optical illusion. Too long, and yet it bent inward. The wallpaper was bleeding dark stains down the walls. The carpet squished under his feet, damp and warm. No doors, just one hallway, leading to what looked like the lobby. He ran, sprinting toward the desk. But there was no clerk, just a dusty ledger. He flipped it open. No ink, just carved names, etched deep into the pages like scratches. And his was there, at the bottom, written twice. First entry, room 209. Second entry, room 209A. He slammed the book shut and bolted to the exit. Pushed the door open. The world outside was gone. No parking lot. No highway. Just mist. Endless, slow-moving fog. And in that moment, he understood. This wasn't a hotel at all. It was a trap. A place that only appears when you're too tired to question it. When your defenses are down. A building that copies itself from reality but wrong. Slightly off. A liminal parasite feeding on those lost between destinations. He turned back, and the hotel door was gone. Only fog, and the faint sound of someone else checking in. I was driving across state lines late at night, trying to shave a few hours off a long road trip. I had done this drive before, same highway, same rest stops. But this time, the GPS glitched. The familiar blue route turned gray for a second, then rerouted. A small pop-up read, faster route available. Save 28 minutes. I tapped yes. It took me off the interstate and down a narrow, 2-lane road flanked by tall pine trees. No street lights, no reflectors. Just darkness that seemed to press against the windows. For a while, I told myself it was just a backroad shortcut. But as the minutes dragged on, I noticed something strange. The silence. Even in remote areas, you expect some signs of life. Passing car. A porch light. And animals' glowing eyes in the brush. But there was nothing. Just the road, the dark, and the vague mechanical voice of the GPS saying, in 3.4 miles, turn left onto Granger Street. Granger Street. It sounded like something out of a book. I followed the turn and saw a rusted, barely legible road sign. The town ahead was called Denslow. I'd never heard of it, and I couldn't find it again later when I looked it up. But at the time, I didn't question it. The dashboard clock blinked 1:13 a.m. The air changed as soon as I entered Denslow. The temperature dropped, even though the heater was on full blast. The houses looked ancient, paint peeling, windows cracked or missing. Not abandoned in the typical sense. More like frozen in time. No decay, just stillness, as if the town had simply paused one day and never resumed. The GPS chirped, "Continue straight for 1 mile." That's when I noticed the people. They weren't moving, just standing in front of houses, staring at my car as I drove by slowly. Men, women, children, all in outdated clothes, wool coats, button vests, high collars. Their eyes followed me, unblinking. None of them waved. None of them smiled. Just watched. I kept going, gripping the steering wheel tighter with every turn. At one point, I passed a church. The doors were wide open, and inside, dozens of candles were lit. A man in a long black coat stood at the entrance. His eyes met mine through the windshield. He raised one hand, slowly, then pointed at me. I pressed the gas harder. The GPS said, "In 800 feet, turn right onto Keller Road." Keller Road looked like an alley, narrow, cracked pavement, overgrown bushes on both sides. But I turned anyway, desperate to follow any path that led out. That's when I saw the sign. It wasn't a regular street sign. It was carved in wood, hanging crookedly from 2 chains. Keller Road. All sins come home. I should have turned back, but the road was too narrow. I couldn't U-turn. I kept going. That's when I noticed my headlights were dimming. Not flickering, just slowly fading, like something was draining the power. Then the GPS stopped speaking. The screen went black. My phone died next. Then the radio. Then the engine. I coasted to a stop in the middle of the road. Silence again. But now it felt thicker, like it had mass. Like the air itself didn't want me to breathe. I sat there, gripping the wheel. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Crunching gravel behind the car. I didn't look in the mirror. I didn't need to. The footsteps stopped at the driver's side window. Then tapping. Slow. Methodical. Fingernails against glass. I turned my head. Nothing was there. Just the fogged-up glass and my own terrified reflection. Then, from the other side, the passenger door creaked. Not opened, just creaked, like someone was pushing against it gently. I reached into the glove box for the flashlight I always kept there. Gone. I turned back to the windshield and screamed. There were faces pressed against the glass. Not just one, 6, pale, expressionless, unmoving, eyes wide, pupils huge, skin like paper. They weren't breathing. Then they all blinked in perfect unison. The engine roared back to life without warning. The dashboard lit up. Headlights flared. The GPS voice returned, but it sounded warped, slowed down like a record played at the wrong speed. Proceed to the route. I slammed the accelerator. The figures vanished as quickly as they'd appeared, melting into the shadows of the trees. The road straightened. The trees thinned out. A mile later, I merged back onto the interstate. No sign of Denslow on the exit sign. No town on the map. I drove the rest of the night without stopping, without breathing right, without turning on the radio. The next morning, I pulled into a gas station and asked the clerk if she'd ever heard of Denslow. She paused, then shook her head. But just before I walked away, she said something that stuck with me ever since. "You didn't get out of the car, did you?" It was supposed to be a quiet getaway. Just me, a weekend alone in a small town, far from the distractions of daily life. The Airbnb listing was charming enough. A rustic little cottage with wooden beams and a soft, inviting bed. The reviews spoke highly of the host, a woman in her 50s named Claudia. She had a reputation for being friendly, welcoming, and keen on making sure her guests felt at home. No complaints, nothing out of the ordinary. I had no reason to be concerned. I arrived late, well after dark. The town was small, barely a few streets, and the house felt tucked away at the edge, surrounded by trees and a foggy mist. The atmosphere was peaceful, almost serene. Claudia greeted me with a warm smile and a handshake, her eyes twinkling with kindness. "Welcome," she said. "Make yourself comfortable." She showed me around the cottage. It was cozy, just as the photos promised. The living room had a stone fireplace, and the kitchen, though small, was fully stocked with everything I might need. I felt reassured. I would be alone here, no distractions, no noise. It was perfect. She left shortly after the tour, telling me she'd be in her own house next door if I needed anything, but that I'd have complete privacy. I thanked her, settled into my room, and unpacked. As night fell, I locked the door and drew the curtains, preparing for a night of uninterrupted rest. The bed was comfortable, and the sound of rain lightly tapping against the windows was soothing. I drifted off quickly, unaware of the strange events that would soon unfold. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of something soft, almost imperceptible. At first, I thought it was the wind or the house settling, but then I heard it again. A creak, followed by the faintest sound of shuffling footsteps. I froze. My heart began to race as I strained to hear. The footsteps weren't coming from outside. They were coming from inside the house. I waited, breath caught in my throat, but the sound stopped. I dismissed it as my mind playing tricks on me. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I forced myself to sleep again, but I awoke several times throughout the night, each time to the same unsettling sensation, that I wasn't truly alone. The next morning, I brushed it off as paranoia. It was just a weird feeling, nothing more. Claudia arrived shortly after I woke up, offering coffee and homemade muffins, her usual cheerful self. I couldn't help but notice the way she kept glancing at me. Just a little too often, just a little too knowingly. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, her voice soft but somehow insistent. I hoped the bed was comfortable. I nodded, too polite to mention the oddness of the night. She smiled and seemed satisfied with my response. After a brief chat, she left me to my own devices, but there was something lingering in her gaze, something I couldn't quite place. The day passed uneventfully, and I spent the afternoon exploring the small town, walking along the cobbled streets and checking out the few shops. But when I returned to the cottage, I felt a strange chill in the air. The house was silent, too silent. No hum of the refrigerator, no creaks of the old floorboards, nothing. I shrugged it off and went to the kitchen to make some dinner. As I was chopping vegetables, I glanced up at the kitchen window. There, just across the yard, stood Claudia's house. It was dark inside, but then I saw it. A faint shape, Claudia, standing by the window watching me. She didn't move, didn't wave. She just stood there, her face expressionless, her eyes fixed on me. I stared back, unease creeping up my spine. Had she been watching me all along? No, I must have imagined it. I shook my head and went back to my dinner, trying to ignore the feeling of eyes still on me. It wasn't until later that night that I began to realize something far more disturbing. I had been lying in bed, reading a book when the door creaked open. My heart skipped a beat, and I immediately sat up, straining to hear the soft shuffle of footsteps again. This time they were closer, in the hallway just outside my room. The door swung open fully, and in the dim light, I saw a silhouette. A woman, Claudia. My blood ran cold, but there was no way she could have entered. I had locked the door. I always lock the door. I jumped out of bed, heart pounding in my chest, and rushed to the door, only to find it wide open. Claudia was nowhere in sight. I checked the house, nothing. No sign of a break-in, no traces of her presence. I checked the windows, which were still locked from the inside. How could she have gotten in? I spent the rest of the night lying awake, listening to every sound, the rustle of leaves outside, the creak of the floorboards. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The next morning, I woke up exhausted. I didn't want to face Claudia, didn't want to deal with whatever strange game she was playing. But I had no choice. She knocked on my door just as I was getting dressed, her usual smile in place. "How did you sleep?" she asked, her voice sickeningly sweet. I hesitated before answering. "Not very well," I said. I thought I heard something last night." Claudia's smile faltered for just a second, but it was enough for me to notice. She didn't seem surprised, didn't try to hide it. "I'm sure it was nothing," she said quickly, as though brushing it off. "Just the house settling." Her words felt empty, like a rehearsed script. That night, I stayed awake, watching the door. I needed answers. As the clock struck midnight, I heard the footsteps again, faint and deliberate. This time I didn't wait. I opened the door to find nothing but darkness. But then, in the corner of the hallway, just beyond the shadows, I saw her. Claudia. Her eyes were wide and unblinking, fixed on me with a look that felt almost predatory. Without saying a word, she stepped back into the shadows and disappeared, her form vanishing into the dark like she was never really there. I left the cottage the next morning, not bothering to pack. I couldn't stay. There was no explanation that made sense, no reason for the things I'd experienced. I left the key on the table and walked out into the early morning fog, never looking back. But even now, when I close my eyes, I see her, standing by the window watching me sleep. The clock read 11:52 p.m. when the last bus of the night pulled up at the deserted station. Julie was exhausted. Her day had stretched longer than expected, and all she wanted was to get home. She had missed the earlier buses, and now this was the final one. She walked toward the bus, the dim streetlight casting long shadows on the cracked pavement, the cool air biting at her skin. It wasn't like Julie to take the late-night bus, but tonight had been different. Something about the way the city felt after dark always seemed to shift, like it was holding its breath. But there was no turning back now. She was too tired to think much about it. The bus driver, an older man with an unshaven face and tired eyes, nodded at her as she boarded. His expression was strange, blank. He didn't speak a word, just turned and resumed staring at the road ahead, his hands gripping the wheel. Julie glanced around the nearly empty bus. The few other passengers were scattered in the back, sitting still, heads lowered, as if they had no intention of making conversation. The entire atmosphere felt off. The air was thick, and the flickering lights above her seemed to hum with an unsettling frequency. She sat in one of the middle seats, hoping for a peaceful ride home. The bus pulled away with a creak, the engine groaning as it gained speed. The city lights faded behind her, swallowed by the night. Minutes passed, and Julie tried to distract herself by scrolling through her phone. It wasn't until she checked the time again that something strange happened. The bus had been moving for nearly 30 minutes, but the time on her phone was still stuck at 11:52 p.m. She shook her head, confused. Maybe the phone was malfunctioning. It wasn't uncommon. But as she looked up, the bus didn't seem to be getting any closer to her stop. The buildings outside were unfamiliar, the street signs unreadable. The city felt wrong, like it had shifted, rearranged itself while she wasn't looking. Julie sat up straighter, heart beginning to race. The bus hadn't made a turn yet.
No intersections, no familiar landmarks.
She hadn't seen another vehicle in ages. The only movement was the occasional flicker of streetlights casting distorted shadows across the road. She looked at the passengers. One man, sitting near the back, was staring at her intently. His eyes were wide, unblinking, as though he was waiting for her to do something. But when she met his gaze, he simply looked away, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. The bus jolted suddenly, throwing Julie against the window. She gasped, clutching the armrest, but the driver didn't react. He just kept his eyes fixed on the road, his expression as blank as before. Julie turned her gaze to the others, but they didn't seem to notice anything odd. The silence on the bus was suffocating. She glanced down at her phone again, still frozen at 11:52 p.m. Her anxiety grew, a cold knot in her stomach. She tried to ask the woman sitting across the aisle if she knew what was happening, but when she opened her mouth, the words wouldn't come out. It was as if the air itself had thickened around her, pressing against her chest, choking her. Her heart raced, her palms sweating. She tried to stand, but her legs felt weak, like they couldn't support her. She reached for the bus's emergency stop button, but when her fingers brushed the surface, the lights flickered once more, this time plunging the bus into darkness for a split second. When the lights came back on, everything had changed. The passengers were no longer seated. They were standing. They had moved to the front of the bus, eyes fixed on her like silent statues. Their faces were pale, void of expression, and they didn't make a single sound. The man who had been staring at her earlier was now standing directly in front of her. His face so close she could feel his breath on her skin. His eyes were wide, as if frozen in fear. Julie froze. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She couldn't speak. Her breath was shallow, her throat dry. She looked toward the driver, hoping he would acknowledge her distress. But his face remained unmoving, his hands tightly clutching the wheel. The bus screeched to a halt without warning. Julie's heart lurched as she stumbled forward, nearly crashing into the empty seat ahead of her. The doors opened. She didn't know why, but the air outside looked wrong. The street beyond the doors was dark, completely empty, and the only sound was the faint hum of the bus's engine. The city was silent, almost dead, as if it had been abandoned for years. The driver didn't look at her, didn't speak a word. He simply opened the door, letting the chilling air flood in. The passengers, still eerily silent, turned their heads toward her in unison. Their faces were now twisted into expressions of terror, but they made no move, as though they were trapped in place. They were waiting for her to make a choice. Julie's mind raced. She couldn't explain it. She had to get off the bus. Something was wrong, horribly wrong, and she knew deep down that if she stayed any longer, she might never leave. With trembling hands, she stepped toward the door. As soon as her foot hit the ground, she felt an overwhelming sense of dread, like something was watching her. Presence. She looked up. The city around her was still lifeless, and there were no signs of life anywhere. No buildings, no lights, just an endless stretch of asphalt and dark sky. Suddenly, the bus doors slammed shut behind her. She spun around, her heart pounding. The bus was moving again, slowly, silently, vanishing into the distance. Julie stood there, paralyzed by fear. She was alone. The streets were empty, and there was nowhere to go. The world around her felt wrong, out of place. She could hear the faint hum of the bus in the distance, growing quieter, fading away. A voice whispered in the back of her mind, "This is the place you were never meant to leave." And then, everything went black. It's always the small things that catch your attention first. A glance in the mirror, a feeling of déjà vu, a faint whisper of familiarity in the back of your mind. But when you find yourself standing face to face with someone who looks exactly like you, a wave of dread floods over you, leaving a mark you can't shake. It was late, the kind of late when the world feels quieter, as if even the moon is holding its breath. I'd been driving for hours, trying to outrun the exhaustion creeping up on me. The road stretched out endlessly, a ribbon of asphalt that disappeared into the thick blanket of night. I'd been on this route before, during the daytime, but now everything felt different. The signs were hazy, the lights seemed too dim, and the air smelled of something I couldn't place, like dust or maybe something older. I spotted a gas station up ahead. The flickering neon sign promised fuel, snacks, and maybe a bit of warmth. It was a small place, tucked between trees and dark fields, with only a single pump and a shabby building that looked like it hadn't seen an upgrade in decades. I pulled in, hoping to stretch my legs and refuel. I could feel the weight of the road settling on my shoulders. The station was empty, eerily so. The hum of the lights above felt louder in the silence, and I couldn't help but notice how the air seemed still, like the world had paused just for me. I stepped out of the car and made my way to the pump. It was then that I saw him. He was leaning against the corner of the building, a man who seemed oddly familiar. But how could that be? I didn't know anyone here, let alone someone who'd be standing in the middle of nowhere at this hour. I stopped. My eyes narrowed, trying to place him. He was wearing a plain jacket and jeans, the kind of outfit you wouldn't remember. But what stuck with me wasn't the clothes or his posture, or even the fact that he was standing there in the first place. No, it was his face. His face was mine. I blinked, convinced I was seeing things. But when I looked again, he didn't change. Same hair, same jawline, same deep-set eyes. Exactly the same. His gaze met mine, and for a moment, neither of us moved. There was no acknowledgement, no surprise in his eyes, just this strange calm, like he knew exactly who I was, and I was supposed to know him too. A chill ran down my spine, and I quickly turned back to my car, hoping it was just the fatigue playing tricks on me. But when I glanced over my shoulder, he was gone. In an instant, as if the ground had swallowed him whole. No footsteps, no sound of movement, nothing. Just the emptiness. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the pump. My instinct screamed at me to get back in the car, to drive off and never look back. But curiosity, that traitorous little voice inside my head, urged me to stay. So I filled the tank and, despite the uneasy feeling gnawing at me, I walked toward the building, hoping to find the attendant or at least some semblance of normalcy. The door to the station creaked open, and the bell above it jingled, a sound that felt strangely out of place in the quiet. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed, casting a pale glow over the shelves of snacks and drinks. But there was no one behind the counter. No clerk, no cashier, just silence. I walked further in, my footsteps echoing unnervingly loud in the stillness. That's when I saw it. An old, tattered photograph pinned to the wall behind the counter. It looked ancient, the edges curled, the colors faded. I couldn't help but step closer, drawn to it like a magnet. And there, staring back at me from the photograph, was me, standing in front of a different gas station, dressed in the same clothes I was wearing now. The same expression, same stance. It was as if someone had captured a moment from my own life without me ever knowing. My heart started pounding in my chest, the fear bubbling up as I stumbled backward. This couldn't be real. Couldn't be. There had to be an explanation. Maybe a prank. Maybe a coincidence. But there was something in that photo, something that felt wrong, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Suddenly, I heard it, the faintest shuffle of footsteps behind me. I whipped around, my breath catching in my throat. Standing in the doorway, just beyond the light's reach, was the man. No, not just any man. It was him again, the one who looked like me. His eyes locked onto mine, and this time there was no mistaking it. The recognition in his gaze was unmistakable, like he had been waiting for me. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, his shadow stretching across the floor. I opened my mouth to speak, to demand an explanation, but no words came. A cold, oppressive feeling filled the room, like the walls were closing in. The temperature dropped, and I could see my breath fogging in the air. The man smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was empty, like a mask, and something twisted behind it. Something I couldn't name but felt deep in my gut. And then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone. No door opening, no footsteps, just nothing. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing, trying to piece together what had just happened. Was I losing my mind? Was I dreaming? But when I walked back outside, the gas station looked the same. The lights still flickered. The pump still stood where it had been. It was as if nothing had changed. Nothing except for the fact that I felt different. Like someone had left a mark on me. I got in my car, trying to shake off the feeling of dread gnawing at my insides. As I drove away, the road ahead seemed endless. The landscape, familiar and unfamiliar all at once. And when I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw him again. But this time it wasn't just the man. It was me. A long stretch of highway cut through the mountains. It was one of those roads that seemed to lead nowhere, a forgotten path that no one ever really paid much attention to. The speed limit was 55 miles per hour, but on nights when the road was empty, it felt like it was okay to push the pedal a little farther. This was one of those nights. Jason had been driving for hours, his hands gripping the wheel as the headlights sliced through the darkness. He was on a solo trip, traveling for work, some mundane business meeting that had kept him away from home for far too long. He was tired. His eyelids were heavy, and the thought of getting to his hotel room and crashing in bed was more tempting than anything else. He didn't realize how quiet the road had become until it felt like the sound of the tires against the asphalt faded into the background. It was as though the world had suddenly gone completely silent. No cars, no wind, not a single sound. It wasn't until he reached a bend in the road that he noticed something strange. The headlights illuminated a small, crumbling stone archway to the right of the road. It was barely visible at first, a faint outline hidden behind some overgrown brush. But something about it caught his attention. Maybe the eerie stillness, or maybe just the way the shadows seemed to crawl around the arch. He slowed down, curiosity pulling him toward it. There was no sign.
No marker.
Nothing to indicate what this strange archway led to. Jason parked the car a little further down, a few yards from the arch. He grabbed his flashlight, turned off the engine, and stepped out into the cold air. The quiet felt thick, almost oppressive. It was strange, but there was something magnetic about the place, something unsettling, like it was beckoning him. He walked closer to the archway, the beam of his flashlight slicing through the overgrown vines that draped over it. The stone was ancient, cracked and weathered by time, but there was an odd feeling about it. The archway stood tall, too tall for something so hidden away. He couldn't explain it, but the moment he stood beneath it, he felt different. It was like the air was heavier, the space tighter. He shrugged it off. Maybe it was just his imagination. Taking a deep breath, he crouched down to look beneath the arch, trying to peer into the shadows beyond. That's when he saw it. Tunnel. A tunnel that seemed to go on for miles, far longer than any tunnel should have been, especially for a stretch of road that didn't seem to lead anywhere. Without thinking, Jason stepped inside, the cold of the stone walls pressing in on him. The tunnel wasn't particularly long, but it was narrow, almost claustrophobic. His footsteps echoed off the walls in a strange, hollow sound. Felt wrong. Something felt deeply wrong about it. But his curiosity, that insidious force that had led him this far, kept him moving forward. The further he went, the darker it became. The air grew colder, heavier. Jason's breath became visible in front of him. He shivered, but he pressed on, the beam of his flashlight bouncing off the walls ahead of him. Then, out of nowhere, the flashlight flickered. He tapped it twice, annoyed by the malfunction, but it came back on, weaker than before. He pushed forward, unwilling to turn back. The tunnel seemed to stretch longer and longer with each step, the air thicker, the shadows darker. And yet, there was no end in sight. His heart started racing. The air was suffocating, like something in the tunnel was absorbing it. The deeper he went, the more it felt like something was following him, something in the darkness just beyond the reach of his light. Suddenly, the tunnel opened up to a large chamber. Jason froze. The beam of his flashlight revealed stone walls, covered in what looked like ancient carvings. Symbols, runes, things he didn't recognize. They weren't just markings. They seemed purposeful, alive even. The more he looked at them, the more they seemed to shift, just at the edges of his vision. But no matter how much he squinted, he couldn't make sense of them. He heard something, a faint sound, like whispers, distant but unmistakable. He froze, listening. The whispers were growing louder, clearer. They were coming from the walls, from the floor beneath his feet. Jason's skin prickled with dread. He turned around quickly, searching for a way out. But when he looked back, the tunnel had changed. It no longer led to the opening where he had entered. The stone was now sealed. No light, no way forward. He was trapped. Panic surged in his chest. He tried to backtrack, but the tunnel felt different. The walls seemed to shift, closing in on him. Every step he took felt like a mistake, the air pressing harder on his chest, making it difficult to breathe. The whispers were louder now, more insistent, almost as if they were speaking his name. Jason's flashlight flickered again. This time it didn't come back on. He was engulfed in darkness. Desperation clawed at him. He felt along the walls, searching for a way out, anything that could lead him back to the road. But the walls were smooth, unyielding, and covered in those strange markings. The whispers didn't stop. They kept circling around him, growing louder, louder, until they filled his mind. Then, out of nowhere, a voice. A soft, raspy voice, as if it were right beside him, spoke directly into his ear. "You shouldn't have come here." Jason's blood ran cold. He spun around, but there was nothing there. The tunnel was closing in. He could feel it, the walls pressing toward him, the whispers growing louder and more frantic. His mind raced. He had to get out. He didn't know how, but he couldn't stay here. He couldn't. With a burst of adrenaline, he turned and ran, blindly charging through the darkness. His heart pounded in his chest. The whispers were still there, chasing him, but the air was growing thinner, colder. Finally, he reached a wall, solid stone, no passage, no way forward. He felt his breath catch in his throat. He turned back, and then, as if the tunnel had a will of its own, the wall shifted again. The opening was there, just like it had been when he first entered. The darkness swallowed him whole as he stumbled into the light outside. He blinked in the sudden brightness, feeling the weight of the air return to normal. He was back at the archway. The road stretched before him, empty, quiet. The archway was gone. Jason stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't remember how he'd gotten out, or what had been lurking in that tunnel, watching him the entire time. He climbed back into his car, the engine sputtering to life as he sped away. The road ahead was still empty, but Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed him, that the road he was on wasn't the same road he had driven down before. There was something else out there now, and it was waiting. It was just after midnight when the train left the station, cutting through the darkened countryside like a serpent weaving between shadows. The faint hum of the wheels on the tracks was the only sound, save for the occasional creak of the carriages. Inside, the atmosphere felt unusually thick, as if something was pressing against the very air. It had been a long day. For Emily, the train ride from the city to her small hometown was supposed to be the last leg of a tiresome journey. She sat alone in her seat, leaning her head against the window, trying to block out the exhaustion that had settled in her bones. The car was mostly empty, a few scattered passengers here and there, but she wasn't concerned. She preferred the solitude of the train at night. Her eyes drifted toward the darkened landscape outside. Trees blurred past, their gnarled limbs reaching up like silent watchers. The train passed through tunnels, the sound of the wheels growing louder as the darkness swallowed everything. Each time they emerged into the night again, the world outside felt just a little more distant, a little less real. A glance at the clock told her it was well past 1 a.m. The soft, rhythmic swaying of the train lulled her into a trance, her mind drifting between wakefulness and sleep. That was when she saw him. A figure sitting across from her, in the same car, had appeared almost unnoticed. He hadn't been there when she first boarded, and yet now he was. At first, she thought he must have boarded at the last stop, though she didn't remember anyone coming in. His presence was unsettling, but not in the way a person would expect. There was no malevolence about him, no threatening aura. He was simply silent. The man sat still, almost unnervingly so, in the seat opposite hers. He was dressed in a plain dark coat, with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. His hands rested neatly on his lap, the fingers long and pale. He wasn't looking at her, but she could feel his gaze as though it was pressing against her skin. Yet, there was nothing about his posture that suggested anything unusual. He just sat there, like an unspoken presence. The train jolted slightly as it crossed a bridge, and Emily glanced at the man again. She felt a prickling sensation on the back of her neck. He hadn't moved an inch. The same stillness, the same silence, but something in the air shifted, a weight, as if the space around him had grown dense, pressing in on her chest. She shook her head, trying to brush off the feeling. It was probably just the exhaustion, her mind playing tricks on her. The sound of the train's wheels against the tracks became a kind of white noise, and for a few minutes, she let herself close her eyes. She tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. The silence in the car grew thicker, pressing down on her, and the air felt cold now, colder than it had been when she first boarded. After a few moments, Emily opened her eyes again, drawn to the man across from her. He hadn't moved, not even once. She couldn't help it anymore. Her curiosity was stronger than the dread creeping up her spine. She stared at him, trying to catch some sign of life, some small movement, a shift in the way he sat. But there was nothing, not even the smallest hint that he was alive. He was perfectly still, his face hidden under the brim of his hat, but his posture, it was as though he had been frozen in time. The train passed another tunnel, plunging them both into complete darkness. Emily's breath caught in her throat as the car seemed to tremble, the shadows inside the compartment shifting like a living thing. When the light returned, the man was still there. But this time something was different. His position had changed, just a little. He was leaning forward now, his eyes fixed on her through the low brim of his hat. She hadn't heard him move, but his gaze pierced her, felt as though he was looking straight through her. Her heart skipped a beat, and she quickly averted her eyes, but she couldn't shake the feeling that his gaze was still on her, even when she wasn't looking. The temperature in the car had dropped significantly, and Emily wrapped her arms around herself. The silence was unbearable now, like it was suffocating her. She could hear the faint sound of her own heartbeat in her ears, and yet there was no sound from him. Not a rustle of fabric, not a breath, not even the shift of his legs. The train creaked as it sped through the night, but Emily felt trapped in this unnerving stillness, this unnatural quiet. Every time she glanced at the man, he was staring back, his head tilted slightly, as though he were observing her every movement, waiting for her to make a mistake. She decided it was time to get up. She needed air, needed space, needed to escape this oppressive presence. Her hand reached for the handle of the door to the next car, but then a voice, soft and raspy, slithered through the silence, stopping her dead in her tracks. "Are you lost?" The man's voice was a whisper, barely audible over the hum of the train. Emily froze. Her heart stopped for a second. She didn't know what to do, whether to answer or run, but the question echoed in her mind. How did he know? How did he know she was lost? She turned back toward him, but before she could speak, the train passed through another tunnel. When the lights returned, the man was gone. His seat was empty. The silence was louder now, deafening. The stillness had become unbearable. She could feel her pulse pounding in her neck as she turned to look down the aisle, her mind racing. He couldn't have left the car so quickly. She would have heard him. But when she looked down the aisle, the door to the next car was closed. There was no sign of him. Emily was alone. For the remainder of the journey, she couldn't shake the sense that something was watching her from the dark corners of the train. The silence never fully left her, and when the train finally pulled into her station, she stepped off in a daze, her eyes scanning the platform for any sign of the man. He was nowhere to be found, and as the train pulled away, Emily swore she saw a figure standing at the window of the last car. His eyes, hidden beneath the brim of his hat, were locked on hers. He was still silent and watching, and just as quickly as the train vanished into the night, the question lingered in her mind. Who was he, and what had he wanted from her? The small, run-down motel sat on the outskirts of a forgotten town. It wasn't much to look at. A single, aging building with flickering neon lights that cast an eerie glow over the empty parking lot. After hours of driving, this was the only place available. The other options were either too expensive or simply too unsettling. I was exhausted. The drive had taken longer than expected, and I just wanted somewhere to sleep for the night. I pulled up, grabbed my duffel bag, and made my way inside. The air smelled musty, like old carpets and mildew. The receptionist behind the counter barely looked up as I approached, his tired eyes barely lifting from the book he was reading. "Room 12, he muttered, sliding the key across the counter without a word. I thanked him, though he didn't seem to care. Room 12. I didn't expect much. A bed, a bathroom, maybe a small fridge. That's all I needed. The door creaked as I entered, and the light overhead buzzed like it was about to go out. The room wasn't exactly dirty, but it had an unsettling aura. The wallpaper was peeling in certain corners, and the bed looked worn out, with a faded floral pattern on the comforter. I tossed my duffel bag onto the bed and let out a sigh of relief, but something about the room felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, though no one was around. I set down my things and moved to the bathroom, splashing water on my face, trying to clear my head from the exhaustion. The cold water helped, but the nagging sense of discomfort remained. When I came back into the room, I noticed it again. The bed. There was something strange about it, something I couldn't place. I glanced at the floor beneath it, but nothing seemed amiss. Just the usual dust and grime that any motel room would have after years of use. But as I walked around to the side of the bed, my eyes caught something odd. A small indentation in the carpet, like something heavy had been pushed into it recently. Something that had left its mark on the floor, as if the bed had been moved just slightly. The more I looked, the more I began to feel like there was something under the bed. I could feel a cold shiver crawl down my spine, and a sense of unease washed over me. No, it was just my imagination. I had been driving for hours, after all. Maybe the long trip was getting to me. I needed sleep. I turned the lights off, pulled the comforter over me, and tried to push the thought from my mind. But as the darkness crept in, I couldn't ignore it any longer. The silence in the room felt suffocating. I felt like something was watching me. Slowly, I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I glanced toward the floor. Nothing moved, but I was certain something was under the bed. My curiosity got the better of me. I slowly swung my legs over the side of the bed, my feet touching the cold, musty carpet. Every fiber of my being screamed at me not to look, but I couldn't help myself. I knelt down, my breath shallow as I peered into the dark void beneath the bed. At first, I could see nothing, just shadows and dust. But then something caught my eye, a glint of something wet. I froze. It was the faint reflection of what seemed like eyes, staring up at me from the shadows beneath the bed. I blinked, trying to make sense of it, but it was gone, swallowed by the darkness. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then I heard it, a soft, faint scraping sound. It was barely audible, but it was there, like something dragging itself across the floor. My heart skipped a beat. I stood up quickly, my hands trembling. The scraping stopped. I thought I heard something whispering from beneath the bed, muffled, almost inaudible, but undeniably there. "Please help." I recoiled, stumbling backward, my back hitting the wall. My breath came in shallow gasps. Was I losing my mind? Had I driven so long that I was hallucinating? The voice came again, clearer this time. "Please, don't leave me." I felt a chill run down my spine. There was no mistaking it now. Someone or something was under that bed. The voice sounded like it was begging, desperate. But the question was, what was it? Fear gripped me, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. I had to see what was beneath that bed. I slowly crouched down again, keeping my distance. I could barely hear the scraping noise anymore. The room seemed unnaturally silent. My hands shook as I reached toward the edge of the bed, my fingertips brushing the floor. And then I saw it. A hand. It was pale, thin, and bony. The fingers were long, unnaturally long, like they had been stretched beyond what was normal. It crawled out from beneath the bed, dragging itself toward me with a slow, deliberate pace. The hand wasn't alone. There was something else, something darker, more sinister. I didn't wait to see what it was. Panic surged through me, and I bolted for the door, throwing it open with everything I had. I didn't look back. I ran out of that motel room, my heart hammering in my chest, my legs trembling. I didn't stop until I reached my car, and I didn't look back. Not once. I drove away as fast as I could, not caring where I went, just as long as it wasn't there. The next morning, I checked out as quickly as I could. I couldn't shake the image of that hand from my mind, and when I asked the receptionist about the room, he simply stared at me blankly. "Oh, room 12, he said with a shrug. "It's always been empty. No one stays there for long." I never went back, but sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear that scraping sound, and I wonder what really lies beneath the bed. It was supposed to be a quick stop, just a detour on my way home from a long road trip, the kind of place you only remember for the unfamiliar road signs and the little diners with too much charm for their own good. But something about the town I stumbled into was different. I had been driving for hours, the sun starting to dip below the horizon, leaving the sky streaked with purple and orange. It was one of those roads that seemed to stretch on forever. No major towns, no real landmarks. The highway seemed endless, punctuated only by the occasional stretch of trees or farmland. I pulled off when I saw the sign, "Welcome to Hollow Creek." It wasn't on my map, but I figured it was one of those small towns that didn't get much attention from GPS systems. My fuel light had flickered on, and I needed a place to stretch my legs. Hollow Creek seemed like the perfect place for a pit stop. I drove down the main street, which was as picturesque as it was deserted. Old brick buildings lined the road, but there was a stillness to the town that unsettled me. No cars on the road, no people walking. It wasn't late yet, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd passed a town this empty. I pulled up to a small gas station on the edge of town, the flickering neon sign offering a warm, inviting glow. The attendant, an older man with a tired smile, greeted me without asking if I needed anything. "Long drive?" he asked, his voice soft, almost as though he were trying to keep the conversation from waking someone else up. His eyes never left mine as he filled my tank. I nodded, too tired to make much conversation. But there was something off about his gaze, too intense, too fixed. I'd met plenty of strangers on the road, but none of them looked at me like that. I asked, "Do you have a place to eat around here?" He blinked, like my question took him off guard. "Oh, the diner's just up the street. You can't miss it." He nodded toward the end of the road, where I could barely make out the outline of a building in the dim light. I thanked him, paid for the gas, and turned down the street toward the diner. The town felt frozen, like it had been stuck in time. The quiet was unnerving, and my footsteps on the cracked pavement echoed through the air. The diner looked like something straight out of a time capsule, the kind of place that hadn't been updated in decades. Inside, the warmth of the neon lights and the smell of stale coffee greeted me, but the atmosphere was heavy. There were no other customers, just one waitress behind the counter, her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, her eyes distant as she wiped the same spot on the counter over and over. I slid into a booth near the window and looked out at the street. Still no sign of life. A few cars parked along the curb, but no one walked by. The street lamp outside flickered, casting long shadows across the pavement. The waitress brought me a menu without a word. Her eyes met mine briefly, but she didn't smile. "You need anything else?" I hesitated, feeling the weight of her gaze. "I was just passing through," I said, trying to make conversation. "How long has this town been here?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she seemed to consider the question like it required more thought than usual. "Oh, it's always been here," she said finally, her voice flat, "just like everything else." I tried to shake the discomfort off, ordering a coffee and a burger. The silence in the diner felt suffocating. I couldn't help but notice the clock on the wall. 8:30 p.m. Something about the way time seemed to slow down in Hollow Creek made my skin crawl. As I ate, I noticed the same odd detail everywhere. The pictures on the walls, old photographs of people who looked too still, too perfect. The furniture was vintage, but not in the charming way. It was worn, faded, like it had been here far too long, far beyond its useful life. After finishing my meal, I walked back to my car, feeling an unease that I couldn't shake. It was almost like the town itself was watching me. As I drove down the street, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. Every building I passed seemed to blur, and for a moment, I wondered if I was just imagining the way the town felt like it was folding in on itself, growing more distant with every turn. I drove out of the center of Hollow Creek and down the same road I had entered on. But something was wrong. The familiar roads, the turn I had made only an hour ago, none of it looked the same. The trees looked different, the houses seemed too far apart. I swerved to avoid hitting something in the road. A dog? It didn't matter. I was lost. I pulled over, trying to get my bearings. My phone had no signal, no service. I checked my map, but there was nothing. Hollow Creek wasn't even on it. I couldn't find the street I had just come from, the gas station or the diner. It was as if the town had never existed in the first place. I kept driving, hoping to get to some other town or find a road sign, but the landscape was different. The trees grew thicker and the houses fewer. I didn't realize how deep I had driven until the headlights caught the shape of an old, decaying house at the edge of the road. It had a for sale sign out front, but the windows were shattered, the door hanging off its hinges. The emptiness felt suffocating. I couldn't bring myself to stop. I turned the car around, my hands trembling on the wheel. It was then I heard it, a low hum coming from the back of the car. At first, I thought it was the engine, but it grew louder, almost mechanical. The noise seemed to vibrate through the car, making my head throb with discomfort. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A figure standing at the end of the road. Tall, shadowy, impossible to make out. It didn't move. It just stared. I floored the gas pedal, my heart racing. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel its presence like it was right behind me. The hum from the car intensified, filling my ears, buzzing louder than anything I'd ever heard. I sped down the road, my eyes fixed on the pavement, my hands sweating on the wheel. Eventually, the noise stopped. The headlights pierced through the darkness, and the buzzing faded. The road ahead seemed to stretch on, quieter now. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't supposed to be there, that I had stumbled into something that was never meant for me to see. I finally made it back to the main highway, the town of Hollow Creek long gone behind me. I kept driving, trying to find a town I recognized, but when I stopped to check my phone, I realized the time had jumped. It was 8:30 p.m., the same time I had seen on the clock in the diner. I haven't spoken of Hollow Creek since, and I never will. I don't know what happened there, or why the town disappeared, but I'll never forget the feeling of being watched, of something just out of sight, something waiting. And no matter where I go, I can never seem to escape the question. Was I the one who disappeared? It was late in the evening when I arrived at the small, out-of-the-way motel. I had been driving for hours, the road winding through desolate countryside, and I was too tired to push on any further. The neon sign flickered in the distance, promising a bed and a warm shower, so I turned off the main road and headed toward the dimly lit parking lot. The place was run down, older than most motels I had seen in my travels. The paint on the walls was peeling, the windows cracked, and the whole building seemed to sag under its own weight. But it was the only option for miles, and the thought of sleeping in my car didn't appeal to me. I stepped out, stretched my legs, and walked toward the reception. As I approached the door, I noticed an old woman sitting in a rocking chair just outside. She looked to be in her late 80s, maybe even older. Her gray hair was tied in a loose bun, and her eyes, though clouded with age, seemed to glimmer in the dim light. She wore a faded shawl, and the expression on her face was one of quiet concern, as if she had been waiting for someone, though I couldn't say why it felt strange to meet her gaze. She didn't speak, but as I got closer, her eyes never left me. I gave a polite nod, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It wasn't the usual warm, friendly glance you'd expect from a stranger, but something more watchful. As I reached the door of the motel office, I heard her raspy voice call out to me. "Don't stay here, young one," she said. I froze. It wasn't the typical greeting or warning a stranger would give. There was something heavy in her words, as though she had seen something I hadn't. I turned back, offering a weak smile, unsure of what to say. "I'm just looking to get a room for the night. It's been a long drive," I responded, trying to brush off the unease creeping up my spine. She didn't respond immediately. Her eyes remained locked on mine, as though she was sizing me up. Then, with a slow shake of her head, she muttered, "It's not safe here. You should go. The rooms, they hold things." The chill in her voice made me second-guess my decision to stay. The way she said it, as though the motel itself was alive with something unseen, made my stomach tighten. But I couldn't turn back. I needed sleep, and I couldn't drive any further. I smiled weakly again, said a polite thank you, and opened the door to the office. The inside was cold, the air thick with the smell of stale cigarette smoke and old wood. A young man stood behind the counter, staring at his phone. He barely looked up when I approached. "Can I get a room for the night?" I asked, trying to keep the unease from my voice. He nodded and handed me a worn-out key, the tag attached to it reading Room 3. $50, he muttered, as though it was routine. I paid quickly and took the key. He returned to his phone, completely uninterested in anything else around him. I couldn't help but feel a little uncomfortable, like I was invisible in this place, but I figured it was just the weird atmosphere of the motel. I walked back outside to my car, the old woman still sitting there in her chair, rocking slowly. She hadn't moved, her gaze fixed on me as I made my way toward the room. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching me closely, tracking every step I took. Room 3 was at the far end of the building, a little distance from the others. The lights flickered as I approached, and I felt the temperature drop noticeably. I put the key in the lock, and the door creaked open. The room was dark, but the faint light from the parking lot illuminated the bare walls and threadbare carpet. There was a musty odor in the air, like it had been closed up for a long time. I didn't mind. It would have to do for the night. I tossed my bag on the bed and went to the bathroom to freshen up. The water in the sink sputtered and dripped in an uneven rhythm, but it was enough to wash away the grime of the road. As I finished, I looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection seemed off, somehow blurry at the edges, but I chalked it up to the dim lighting. When I turned to head back into the main room, I noticed something strange. A soft tapping came from the window. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the sound repeated, insistent and rhythmic. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest, before cautiously walking toward the window. I looked outside, but there was nothing there. No trees, no animals, no movement, just the empty parking lot and the faint glow of the neon sign in the distance. I brushed it off as my imagination. I had driven for hours and I was probably just overtired. I turned back to the room, but as I did, I saw something that froze me in place. The old woman was standing by the door, looking in at me through the small gap where the door didn't quite close all the way. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and unblinking, and her lips moved, but no sound came out. My breath caught in my throat. How had she gotten there so quickly? I hadn't heard her footsteps, hadn't seen her approach. I took a step back, my pulse racing. The tapping at the window resumed, louder now, and I turned back to it, heart in my throat. But as I looked out again, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Standing in the parking lot was the woman. She wasn't sitting in the chair anymore. She was standing there, her face pressed against the glass of the window, staring in at me with that same unsettling, knowing gaze. A rush of panic surged through me. I backed away from the window, stumbling over my own feet. But when I looked back, she was gone. I hurried to the door, swung it open, and looked down the hallway. There was nothing, no sign of the woman, but something in the air felt wrong, heavier. The whole building seemed to pulse with an energy that made my skin crawl. I grabbed my bag, but just as I turned to leave, a voice echoed through the empty hallway. "Don't check out until morning," it whispered, faint but unmistakable. It was her, the old woman. Her warning had been meant for me, but it was too late. The door slammed shut behind me as the lights flickered one last time. The building, it had already decided. It was supposed to be an ordinary road trip, one last adventure before the summer ended. My friends and I decided to hit the open road, driving across the country. We planned a few stops at small towns, the kind with roadside diners, old gas stations, and places where time seemed to have forgotten. The kind of towns where nothing ever happens. Or so we thought. We stopped for the night in a town called Ashford. Small, quiet, nearly abandoned. There was a small bed and breakfast at the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just a charming little place with ivy crawling up the brick walls and a rusted sign that read, "Welcome to Ashford Inn." It wasn't much, but it was cheap and we were tired. After a long drive, we were more than ready to settle in. The woman who ran the inn greeted us with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She seemed distant, almost too quiet, but we didn't think much of it. After all, this was just a stopover. We unloaded our bags and made our way to the room, a modest but clean space with 2 double beds. The room felt a little cold, even though the sun had been out all day, but we shrugged it off. Once we got settled, we decided to explore the town. We wandered around, stopping at a few shops that had barely any inventory. It felt like a ghost town, and the air had a heaviness to it, as if something unseen was watching us. But we were young, carefree, and the quiet made it seem peaceful. We didn't have anywhere to be, so we spent hours walking around, taking pictures, and just enjoying the novelty of being in a place so forgotten by the world. That evening, we returned to the inn to relax. It wasn't until we were back in the room that I started feeling a little off. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right about this town, or this place. It wasn't any one thing. It was more of a sense that something was out of place, something just out of reach. I pulled out my phone and began flipping through the pictures we'd taken earlier. We had taken a few at the old church in the center of town, an old stone building with a bell tower that seemed to loom over everything. I was scrolling through the photos when I stopped. There, in the background of one of the photos, was a figure. At first, I didn't think much of it. Could have been another tourist, someone walking by in the distance. But the more I stared, the more I realized something was wrong. The figure was blurry, almost like it had been distorted by the light, but what struck me as odd was how familiar it looked. It was a man, standing by the old church's gates. He was dressed in dark clothes, his face hidden in shadow. I didn't recognize him from the photos we'd taken that day. In fact, I was sure no one had been near the church when I snapped the picture. It was just us, my friends and me, and the street was empty. I mentioned it to my friends, but they brushed it off as nothing. "It's probably a glitch," one of them said, and another suggested the man was just a passerby who blended into the background. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept drifting back to the photo, to that strange figure standing there in the shadows. I decided to check the other photos from that spot, the ones that I had taken just seconds before. I scrolled through each one, and there was nothing. No one in the background, no strange distortion, just clear, empty space. But when I got to the next photo, there he was again. This time, the figure was closer, standing right by the church steps, his back to the camera. I zoomed in on the photo, my heart pounding as I tried to make out any details. He was tall, broad-shouldered, but his features were unclear, as if the camera itself refused to capture him properly. Something inside me urged me to go outside, to look for him. I told my friends I was stepping out for a bit, that I needed some fresh air. They were too tired to question me, and by the time I was out the door, they had already gone to bed. The night was cold, the air thick with an unsettling silence. I walked slowly toward the church, my footsteps echoing in the empty street. The building loomed ahead, its darkened windows like hollow eyes. I stopped at the gates, the same gates where the figure had appeared in the photo. I stared at the ground, feeling the weight of something unseen pressing down on me. There was no one there. No man, no shadow, no sign of anyone walking around. I took a deep breath and turned back to the inn, trying to calm my nerves. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just overthinking it. But as I walked back, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I felt it in my chest, a weight. When I got back to the room, I checked the photos again. To my shock, the man was gone. I checked the date and time on the photo, thinking maybe I'd been mistaken, but everything matched up. The photo was taken just a minute before I had gone outside. I showed my friends the photos, but by then, they were tired, and the strange unease I had felt seemed to vanish in the light of morning. The next day, we left Ashford without a second thought, but the strange encounter stayed with me. For months, I couldn't stop thinking about the photos. I kept coming back to the same question. How was it possible for someone to be in the picture who wasn't there when I took it? I kept revisiting the idea in my mind, hoping for an answer that would make sense. But there was no explanation. Years later, I decided to look up Ashford. To my surprise, I found that the town had been abandoned shortly after the Great Depression. All the businesses had closed down, and the inn was one of the last buildings standing, long since forgotten. I couldn't find any record of the man in my photos. No one seemed to know who he was. I still don't know. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, or maybe something else was at play. But every time I go through that photo, I wonder if there's a reason I don't remember seeing him. A reason why he was there when I didn't see him. And I'm left with one chilling thought. What if I wasn't the one who was supposed to be there at all? It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend getaway. My friends and I had planned this camping trip months in advance, desperate to escape the daily grind and reconnect with nature. The forest, deep in the heart of the mountains, was untouched by the usual hustle of tourists. We had been told it was quiet out there, the perfect place for solitude. That was the first mistake. We arrived just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the trees. The campgrounds were isolated, a few miles off the main road, and the silence surrounding us was almost unnatural. No birds, no insects, nothing. It felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. We set up our tents quickly, eager to start a fire and get to grilling our food, but the unease in the air was hard to ignore. As night fell, we gathered around the fire, roasting marshmallows and joking about ghost stories. But as the darkness deepened, the mood started to shift. The air felt colder, and the wind seemed to carry a faint, high-pitched sound, like the distant cry of something in distress. At first, we thought it was an animal, perhaps a wolf or even a raccoon, but the sound was strange, too shrill to be anything we'd ever heard before. We dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on us and decided to go to bed. I crawled into my tent, zipped it up tightly, and lay down, staring up at the ceiling, listening to the crackling fire outside. My friends were already settling into their own tents, the night growing stiller by the minute. Then the scream came. It was sudden, sharp, and unmistakable. A bone-chilling shriek that sliced through the silence of the forest. The scream was so loud, it felt like it was right outside my tent. It echoed through the trees, stretching far beyond what I thought was possible. I sat up, heart pounding in my chest, straining to listen. There was no mistaking it. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. It was human. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag, my mind racing. I could hear movement from the other tents, the frantic rustling of fabric as my friends reacted. The scream was followed by more high-pitched, guttural, desperate. They came in rapid succession as though someone or something was being tortured just outside the campgrounds. I unzipped the door of my tent slowly, peering out into the inky blackness. The fire was barely a flicker now, casting long, eerie shadows across the campsite. The trees, thick and twisted, loomed like dark sentinels surrounding us. There was nothing there, no sign of movement, no figure standing in the clearing, just the empty, endless forest. I heard someone call my name. Mark, one of my friends, his voice trembling with fear. I turned toward his tent, but before I could make a move, the scream came again. Closer this time, louder. It seemed to come from the forest itself, as though the very trees were crying out in agony. I felt a cold, crawling fear crawl up my spine. The sound was wrong. There was something distorted about it, like the person screaming wasn't fully human. The scream seemed to bend and twist, looping in on itself, as if it were coming from multiple voices at once. And then it stopped, just as suddenly as it had begun. A deep silence followed, so deep it felt suffocating, oppressive. My breath was loud in my ears, my heartbeat pounding in my chest. I didn't dare move. The feeling that we were being watched crept over me like a second skin. I glanced at my friends, and I could see the same fear in their eyes. We didn't need to speak to know that none of us were going to sleep tonight. Then, another sound. This time it wasn't a scream. It was a whisper, soft and barely audible, but unmistakable. It was coming from the trees. I could almost hear it, the words curling into the night air. "Help me! Help me!" The voice was faint, like it was muffled by the earth itself, but it was undeniably real. We all froze, holding our breath, straining to hear. It was as if the very forest was alive, speaking to us, beckoning us closer. But I knew we couldn't go. We couldn't move. Something was out there. Something old, something twisted. Mark was the first to break the silence, his voice hoarse. "We need to get out of here. Now." But before we could make any moves, a new sound filled the air. A low, guttural growl that rumbled through the ground beneath us. It wasn't an animal, not like anything we'd ever heard before. It was like the earth itself was speaking, angry and alive. The ground vibrated beneath my feet, and I could feel the trees around us shifting, moving in ways they shouldn't. Without a word, we all began scrambling. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped my tent, but just as I stepped out into the clearing, I saw something that stopped me cold. In the distance, between the trees, something was moving. Something tall, too tall to be human, and too thin to be a creature. It was like a shadow, slipping between the trees with an eerie grace, barely visible in the dark. I couldn't make out its shape, but I could feel its presence. its eyes watching us, burning into my soul. We all turned, panic setting in, as the growl turned into a hissing sound, like something was breathing in short, frantic bursts. The shadows between the trees seemed to stretch and twist, crawling toward us, surrounding us. It wasn't the forest we had come to know. This wasn't nature. This was something else, something ancient, something hungry. We didn't look back as we ran. We didn't stop until we reached the main road, far from the cursed forest. But even then, the screams still echoed in my mind. And even now, when I close my eyes, I can still hear them. The screams of something trapped in that forest, something that was never meant to be freed. We never went back to that forest. We couldn't, but the question still lingers. Was it ever really a forest? Or was it something else, waiting for the next group of travelers to listen to its call? It was supposed to be a simple overnight stop on the way to my destination. A small, roadside motel just off the highway, a place to rest, grab a quick bite, and continue the journey. But that night, I found myself in a room that shouldn't have existed. I arrived at the motel well past midnight. The fluorescent lights above the reception flickered as I stepped inside. A tired, middle-aged man sat behind the counter, his eyes barely open. He looked up, then down at the register, before handing me the key to room 17. Room 17, I repeated, looking at the small key tag. There was nothing unusual about it. I had stayed in worse motels before, but something about this place felt off. Maybe it was the strange silence, or the fact that there were no other cars in the parking lot. It was like the entire place was abandoned, yet somehow functioning. I thanked the man and headed to my room. When I reached the door, I noticed something odd. The number on the door wasn't a simple 17, as I had expected. It was a faded, almost illegible number, scratched deep into the wood. 12. I thought it was just an oversight, perhaps a mistake during the repainting. I shrugged it off, unlocked the door, and entered. The room was dark, save for the faint light coming from the flickering lamp on the nightstand. It smelled faintly of mildew, but nothing too overpowering. I set my bag on the bed, pulled the curtains aside, and looked outside. The highway was distant, quiet, almost like a dream. But when I turned back to the room, I felt it, the air, thicker. It was as if the room was closing in, something I couldn't quite explain. I turned the lock on the door and laid on the bed, the faint hum of the air conditioning barely noticeable. I was exhausted, and soon enough I drifted off to sleep. I woke up to the sound of soft knocking. It was just a tap, like someone trying to be polite but failing. At first, I assumed it was just the wind or the building settling. But the knocks came again. 3 taps, then silence. I swung my legs off the bed and walked to the door. I hesitated before opening it, the feeling of unease growing. The corridor outside was empty, no sign of anyone, just the same flickering light from down the hall. I stepped back inside and locked the door again. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks. I was still groggy from sleep, but when I turned back to the bed, something had changed. The room seemed smaller. The walls seemed to lean in, as if they were pressing against me. I looked at the clock beside the bed. It was just past 3 a.m., but something felt wrong about the way time moved. I took a deep breath and tried to shake it off, but the feeling wouldn't go away. There was something in this room, something that didn't belong. I checked the window again, but nothing had changed outside. The highway was still there, empty. Still, a sense of dread lingered in the air. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The strange knocking, the odd feeling, the way the room seemed to shift. It was as if the space itself was warping. It was too quiet, too still. I decided to leave. I grabbed my bag and opened the door, but when I stepped into the hallway, I was met with a strange sight. The corridor was different, the same faint yellow lights, but now, a new door stood where there hadn't been one before. It wasn't on the map. I had walked past this hallway only a few minutes ago, and that door hadn't been there. I took a cautious step toward it, curiosity getting the better of me. As I approached, the door seemed to call to me, as if beckoning me closer. My hand hovered over the doorknob. Should I open it? What was behind it? Something was telling me I shouldn't, but my feet moved before I could stop them. I turned the knob and entered. The room inside was a mirror of my own. The same low ceiling, the same bed, but the walls seemed even darker. I looked at the door I had come through, but it wasn't there anymore. In fact, the door I had entered through had vanished entirely, replaced with a solid, smooth wall. There was no escape. I spun around, but everything was wrong. The room had no windows. The furniture was different, but had that same sense of familiarity, like a dream you couldn't quite remember. Then I heard it, a voice, soft and whispering from behind me. "You shouldn't have come in." I turned around quickly, but there was no one there. The whisper came again, this time louder. "You shouldn't have come." I ran to the wall where the door should have been, but there was nothing. I screamed, banged on the walls, but it was like no one could hear me. The room seemed to fold in on itself, getting tighter with every breath. The ceiling felt lower, the walls closer. I was suffocating. The next thing I remember was waking up back in my room, the room I had checked into earlier that night, room 17. It was exactly as it had been when I first entered. The bed was still made, the faint smell of mildew lingered in the air, and the clock read 3 a.m. again. Had I dreamed it? Was it just some fevered hallucination? I grabbed my things and fled, rushing to the reception desk to demand an explanation. But when I reached the lobby, the man behind the counter was gone. In his place was a small, cracked sign on the counter that read, "Closed for the night." I ran outside, desperate to leave, but when I looked at the parking lot, there was no car, no other travelers, only the empty, winding road ahead. The motel was gone. I looked back at the space where it had been, but there was nothing, just the highway stretching off into the distance. Nothing. I wasn't sure if I had imagined the whole thing, but something told me that room, the room that didn't exist on the map, had never truly been a part of this world.